I have some bad news. Your girl has been bamboozled. um, there is a phenomenon on Twitter and Reddit where people will post pictures and be judged for whether they pass or not. And me, in a moment of weakness, interacted with this person, assuming they were in good faith, and let them post a picture of me. Now, in the trans community, I do get a lot of positive feedback. In a lot of circumstances, especially when I'm using girl voice, I can usually pass pretty easily. The thing is that I don't really do that online as much. And to be honest, like, I'm not thinking passing is always the highest thing, but I do like compliments. I am, in fact, an attention whore. However, in a moment of weakness, I let this asshole post this. And then I realized some shit was weird. Because the people that were responding basically were saying I should get hit by a truck. It was kind of awful, if I'm perfectly honest. I guess trigger warning for transphobia. But I want to talk about this situation because I think that this is an issue. So I'm going to show you on stream this person's account. Now, this account doesn't exist anymore. It was very much already destroyed. But these pop up every 5 minutes. Trans passing, do you pass or not? And what they do is they either grab girls' pictures they post online, or in my case, they asked. And they were even nice enough to take it down when I complained. But they also kind of were toxic as shit to other people. Here's the thing. The problem with this is it's based on two misconceptions from my perspective, and I want to start from there. Yes, trans biology. When I initially looked at this, I thought it might be people actually doing like good biological data about like how the bimodal system of biology works and why like trans people are not this affront to biological standards or science or whatever. That turned out not to be the case when I actually looked through it. This is problematic for two reasons. One, it makes the assumption that passing is the goal, when I tend to think of passing more as a simultaneous form of validation, but also really just a form of survival, right? If I pass as a woman in public, I don't get shit for it. If I don't, then I get lots of shit for it, or can at least. The other problem with this is that the people doing the judging are not trans people, nor are they allies. The people that are doing this, as many people figured out, is that they were conservatives and alt-righters. So let's discuss. So, Zena, what is your take on this stuff? What are your thoughts? You wanted to be on this segment, so I'm curious where your thoughts are.
I generally find the pass or not pass really not helpful.
Okay.
Particularly for stuff like this. Yeah, I want to be really careful, especially when people are going through a lot of body changes very quickly, or especially massive ones, to not play into like their fears about how they look. Because I know, being in a weird in-between place with your body is a really weird place to be. I think a really vulnerable place to be, whether you're a teenager, go through puberty, or later in life you're going back. You're not going back, but you're starting your HRT, right? You're shifting like your entire sense of being, okay? Like that, and how you interact with the world is completely shifting, and so, I feel like pass or no pass gets into a really crappy territory with that can probably affect people's self-esteem way more than we'd like to think it could.
Well, and the problem being is that there's assumptions in there that I think are really fucked. So like one of them is this idea that first off, in asking the question, there isn't going to be some sort of personal value established with that. And I think that's kind of fucked because that's exactly what people are going to do. They're going to assume that they're either their value or the people that are viewing it are going to assume that the value of that person is going to be based on this one criteria. The other reason why I think this is really problematic is because what it can do is, like you said, if somebody's in a really, strange in-between space, even if they would pass in normal public, right? Which happens. There's times where trans women will be absolutely fine. They'll pass 100%, even if they aren't perfect in every feminine behavior or whatnot, because generally people don't really just sit there and try to search you. The problem is that when we're talking about online stuff, people are scrutinizing you, and the very name of this phenomenon immediately starts with the concept that you are trans. So if somebody already thinks negatively about us, there's no way that person's acting in good faith.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a whole lot of beef with these things. Conventional beauty standards start coming out real hard, especially like all the toxic beauty standards absolutely still come out with this sort of thing. Just the sexism is just really there, and it also sets up a really weird like line that you have to beat, right? Like this idea that you have to pass. And like you said, there's good reasons. Safety, if it's helping you feel good to be seen in a certain way, people are seeing you that way, cool. But there shouldn't be like one solid line, and I think this gets into that, black and white, pass or no pass. There's not a middle option, okay?
Well, and to be very clear, one of the things that I think is really important to recognize here is this person in their interactions with people was saying a bunch of alt-right shit. Why don't you believe in free speech, this and that. Again, they were willing to take down my picture, which was fine. I appreciate that. But this wasn't seeming to be the thing that happened with other people. I'm actually not sure why they did that. But one of the things that this really sucks is with this situation, it's also exposing trans women who really wouldn't normally come on people's like actual radar and exposing them to potential harassment, because this person literally has this feel of being set up as they claim they are trans, but they are not. They may not be, and they're touting alt-right values. So it seems like what it's there to do is sort of tear down trans people via committee. Let's see. Funky Thought said, pretty sure they never intended to be helpful. They retweet trans women's pics so their followers can make fun of them. It's purposely malicious. Yeah, they say that it's supposed to be helpful, but yeah, no, it's pretty clear that they're lying, or at very least are not. I mean, the best benefit of the doubt I could give them is that they're utterly ignorant to the idea of what they're actually doing, but I don't want to give them that level of good faith. I think it is absolutely malicious. I think that they're lying about that effect. Now, what's interesting is even if they are lying about that effect, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not trans. They've made that claim, and I'll get to in a minute, but this is true on Reddit as well. r/transpassing is a subreddit, as far as I can tell, run by trans people, where trans people judge each other to say whether they pass or not.
Oh, yeah, and scrolling through there, it is very obvious which beauty standards get the upvotes and which ones don't.
Well, yeah, it's one of the things that really was emotionally concerning when I was on Reddit is, so if you go on Reddit and you're a trans woman and you're fairly into your transition and you're posting pictures to your friends, your family, all that, and showing how you're doing, generally speaking, I get a lot of likes, I get a lot of stuff because I guess I'm conventionally attractive, at least I hope so. But also that, I'm fairly far into my transition. I'm about a year and some change on HRT. I, already had kind of a bubbly face, so it already kind of went well with the feminization stuff. It just seems to work. So, is this subreddit marriage by Calvin and Blair? I don't know, but by the way, I like the way you spell their names. I want that to be the going forward thing we do. But yeah, I look at this and I go, what is the goal of this? Because the issue is that the initial premise gets really fucked, right? Because what it basically becomes is if you post a picture to one of these subreddits or online on, say, this pass or not pass account, whatever variation of that account they're doing now, that you get into this weird place where, people who are hyper scrutinizing the way you look, you're expecting them to give you feedback on whether they can tell you're trans or not, despite the fact that they sort of a priori know you are trans. And, as Zena said, because of conventional beauty standards, that thing, and the fetishization of... I can't say things.
Fetishization?
Fetishization, thank you. fetishization of youth, a lot of people that post on there are usually young trans girls who are just trying to get some kind of boost of self-esteem. And a lot of these people are also maintaining accounts where they're doing, like, you know, not safe for work content, and usually referring to themselves as things like, you know, sissies. I'm not against sex work. I love sex workers. They're great people. Talked to a few of them that fucking blew my mind on some shit. But I dislike when trans women are in these formats because it feels like what it's doing is fetishizing them for being trans. It's putting them in a weird situation. And this trans passing idea feels similar, where in some ways, do you look like a conventional cis woman? Okay, that could be a question, but because it starts from this way in which you already know the person's trans, I don't know if I can actually trust the other person's view. Trans people are notorious due to gender dysphoria to not really be able to tell with some of that stuff, because we tend to accept things that other people may or may not even notice, or may or may not normally accept, because again, sort of gender nonconformity kind of goes that way. So, like, what is it? Hanging Wednesday said, honestly, looking at this picture over time makes me think of the weird incel boards and tendencies to post pictures of themselves, then getting criticized. And exactly. So one of the things I've seen is Contra put out a video about incels where she talked about the notion of digital self-harm. The idea that people will post pictures of themselves to be critiqued and voted down. And I have to wonder in some ways if that's not the reason I engaged with this person. It wasn't because I was looking for necessarily the emotional validation. I think it was that in a moment of weakness, I wanted to convince myself that I was absolutely just, you know, hideous. So I let this post, hoping for the best, but genuinely thinking that I was going to come back as being awful, which it did. It actually reified that. It actually made all of the doubts in my head seem stronger. And I think that's the problem here, is that regardless of who's running these, which is important, mind you, I think this can lead to a form of digital self-harm where they will hurt themselves based on how people judge them and look at them. So yeah, I think this stuff is really concerning. The reason why I wanted to talk about today, and I think Zena is equally passionate about this, is that I'm not surprised that I fell for this. I can be rather dumb sometimes. What I'm more concerned with is that there are people who don't have the support system I do. I have friends and family around me who are incredibly supportive, incredibly loving. I can reach out to people who I've known for 20 years and you know, get some kind of positive feedback, or they'll, you know, rib me a little bit and kind of get me out of my head. But what if a trans girl doesn't have those things? What if she's on her own because her parents kicked her out? What if she doesn't have those kinds of, like, social nets? And as such, her entire self-esteem might be based on just the responses here. And she either can get people who are fetishizing her and saying, yeah, she absolutely passes, in which case they're really just sort of sexualizing her, or they're treating her as something awful, something other than human, like they said to me. Should hit with a truck. My genuine argument here is this. These people break TOS. I think that things like this, if they are not heavily moderated by trans people, should be immediately reported, because I think this stuff is toxic. I think this stuff leads to really negative outcomes. Before I go on, Zena, do you have anything else you want to add? What about the trans passing for you as a non-binary person? Like, well, how does that? Is there a way that gets under your skin as well?
I don't usually take pictures of myself in the first place, so yeah, I mean, I won't touch these things with a 10-foot pole. Like, let me be real here. And so I don't know if there's anything specifically about non-binary so much as just I see how my issue with this stuff is generally how it affects you, right? Yeah. Going through those, especially early in transition, and watching you kind of needing some sense of like validation or someone outside of your head to say something positive, right? Like, and that's against this backdrop of a lot of fucking societal pressure in lots of really toxic manners that we've been talking about, right? Yeah, I don't. That's where my personal beef really comes in.
Is the negative impact on me?
Yeah, I guess because I just wouldn't go near the stuff or post pictures, really.
Well, and that's the thing is like I feel like
that's probably more a personal inclination.
No, that's fair, and you've never been a big picture person anyway. One of the things I would say is like I'm thinking about it in the context of like Luxander's deconstruction of ContraPoints' video, The Aesthetic, where Luxander says something really wonderful in that video, and I think it's still right on, is that non-binary people can't pass. Passing is exclusively a, like, is it exclusively like sort of binary trans person phenomenon?
No, this is true. I do feel some. I guess it doesn't usually come up in relationship to these things, but there's nothing for me to pass as, right?
Well, yeah, but on top of that, but think about it from this perspective. If there's nothing to pass as, there's never that actual urge to either digitally self-harm in that particular way or necessarily try to get validation through people in that way. Because usually with, NB groups, people who are like trans non-binary, a lot of times their big thing is that they have other metrics by which they judge how someone appears or how they look, or judges them based on the context of how they look, how they want to be judged, as opposed to the arbitrary and frankly very subjective notion of passing.
No, this is true. The metrics that I use I just kind of have to hope that people engage with me in the way that makes sense for the gender that I'm feeling most of the time. That's usually how that goes, right? Like that's kind of wibbly wobbly.
Yeah.
And usually I really just take issues with the people that polarize me, or not polarize. Well, I guess.
Yeah, no, it is sort of polarizing. In
right.
fact, I would
when they only see the feminine side and that's all they see, or that's the major part of me that they have connection to, then I have issues because that
ignores a huge amount of you. The parts of you that are neutral, the parts of you that are both, the parts of you that are masculine. Like, no, absolutely, and that actually could be something that comes back into the previous segment, is the idea of like the polarized thinking. Is I could argue that polarized thinking is actually probably related to the way people struggle with ambiguity, which is probably why there's some level of struggle with, for example, bisexual people, non-binary people, because if you're somebody who's in kind of this liminal space of identity, that's a thing.
Well, I think this concept is absolutely polarized thinking, right?
Yeah, well, it absolutely is, because pass or not pass, like, again, in what context?
And you only get two options.
Right? Hanging Wednesday said, with nothing to pass as, there's nothing to prove or receive validation from, in this context at least. Fair. He also said, definitely, and there's a little potential hint in their language, their gender they identify as rather than the gender they are. That's a big red flag to me. I agree. Absolutely. Simbel said, I guess about what you mentioned on digital self-harm on a non-binary person, if they're told they pass, that it would be negative for them. Just a thought of a way that they could also damage them. Yeah. So when a non-binary person, say, they've socially transitioned, but they might not have like physically transitioned in any way. They may not feel they need to. They may not experience dysphoria. Yeah. So there might be a way in which, like, let's say you're a she/they non-binary person, right? You identify with your assigned gender for the most part, but there's this other part that like doesn't quite fit. If people just sort of refer to you as a girl or refer to you in a way that is ignoring that neutral or both sort of spectrum therein, in a way, yeah, you're sort of cis passing, but that actually can also feel somewhat invalidating. That can feel like that part of you is missed. So that can be, yeah, I think in some ways that could be a thing. It would depend, I guess, how the person views their identity and their expression and how those interact, right? Because ideally, identity is just identity. It has nothing to do with expression. Expression is more sort of a social engagement. We have to remember that about passing, is that what you're trying to do with passing is essentially that split-second judgment that people make where they see someone and go, boy, girl, boy, girl. You're actually trying to, in some ways, hit that thing so you appear as the proper gender. With non-binary people, there isn't a preset cultural standard of what a non-binary person is like, and so the thing is they can't really pass because they're never going to hit that same instant sort of validation or acceptance button that someone has. Like when somebody interacts with me and they just think of me as a woman and not a trans woman, there's definitely changes in their behavior and the way they engage with me. With a non-binary person, that gets a lot more complicated. And I can imagine someone who is on that she-they spectrum or he-they spectrum might really struggle with that shit. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really important to kind of be aware of this stuff because I feel like, here's where I'll end it on this thought. I don't want to beat anyone up about wanting to do this. Like if you really, really want to know if you pass or not, I think there's a way that could be done in a good faith way. I think there's a way that can be done in a community that's safe and with people giving you very, very compassionate critique. Twitter ain't it, chief. Like it just isn't. Doing this on here, you never know who you're dealing with. You never know what their actual engagement is. You never know what they're trying to do. I think it's really a bad idea to engage with this.
Yeah. I would screen I think that's probably the big thing here is by all means post pictures, have fun. It really helps and it's a lot of fun. Like screen your groups and where you're going to do this super well is what I would say.
Yeah.
Right. Have enough background history or enough, working with this group or, engaging with them to know kind of where they're at and then, maybe start posting.
No, absolutely. Okay. So I think that's all I've got on this topic. If more pops up, I will, but I just want to be really clear that like these people who do this, well, I had a fairly okay experience. I've seen in other cases that people haven't, and I agree that with the earlier comment about this being inherently malicious. I think, especially with the objectification of trans women, I think this stuff can get really dangerous because, as we've talked about before, there's things like fetishizing. There's also just things about like, rather than actually judging the person for what they actually pass as or how they identify, there's a tendency to immediately lash out. I mean, again, remember, the transpanic defense is the thing that exists. And as such, like, you might absolutely pass as your identified, your gender you are. However, people have lost their shit and like attacked people for that, right? Like if a conservative sees you online and goes, that part of his brain goes, that person's hot. That doesn't bring up happiness. What that brings up is anger because if he knows you're trans, that can lead to a lot of really negative outcomes. So I think that's all I've got on this. How do you feel?
I feel like that's about what I've got.
Okay. All right, cool. So it absolutely is legal murder. Just no, I never once said that the transpanic defense is ever just, like at all. It's never just at all. Full stop. I'm not sure if that was misconstrued, but or misunderstood. But no, the transpanic defense is absolutely legal murder. It is super not just. Or you might just be talking to people who are watching this in the future. But no, it absolutely is disgusting. The transpanic defense is essentially because of somebody's trigger around their misperception of a person's gender, they go into a flip out that is both simultaneously transphobic and also homophobic and can lead to either being physically assaulted, emotionally attacked, or flat out just fucking murder. Actually, if I remember correctly, Maryland just, I think, is the process of legally getting rid of theirs, which is pretty fucking poggers. So yeah, so with that, why don't we, we'll end this one here. I want to thank everyone so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe. Do remember our comments are moderated. They do require review. So if you're going to say something stupid, transphobic, homophobic, or racist, they will just be flagged and they just will be, like, deleted. You can waste your time. I beg you, please. But it's not really going to go anywhere. The people we have that go over the comments are going to do so, and they're going to get rid of anything that isn't good conversation or good or good commentary, even if it's positive or negative towards the video. So just to make that 100% clear for commentary. You also can donate to us at streamlabs.com/transgirltherapist/tip. Any amount is totally cool. We really appreciate it. That goes towards new equipment. That goes towards lots of stuff. We also have a Patreon, so you can go to patreon.com/transgirltherapist, and you can join. I just recently put a new tier on there for a $3 amount. That will get you the videos early, and yeah, it will help us out a great deal. So with that said, again, thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.